so today at Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue, our plan will be, first we'll go ahead and stop in with our resident foxes. And so we'll take a look at our two different kinds of foxes that we commonly see here in Sonoma County. And then we'll head on up to the nursery where we have just happened to get in earlier this week a infant orphan fox. And so that'll be our lineup for today. While we're waiting for everyone to arrive, just give you a quick update on what's happening at the center. We continue to get more and more orphans in. We're up to, at this moment, 109 animals currently in care, the vast majority of which are all on site. We do have a few out in foster. Of that 109, we still started with that big wave of opossums, and the opossums keep on coming in. We got about 70 opossums, but we're starting to get all the other orphans as well. We have orphan weasel, we have orphan skunk, we have orphan fox, and we have orphan raccoons all on site. Overall, for the year, we're getting about within the range of the typical numbers, although on the mammal side, although our avian patients coming in haven't been as high as normal. Maybe that's a response of how people are moving around in terms of COVID. We'll just wait and see. And so, do we have a fair number of folks with us now?
We do. We have about 25 people with us.
Okay. And so I'm standing outside our fox enclosure here on our education loop. And so we have two foxes within here that are not releasable. So we're going to go on into that enclosure, take a look, and talk about these foxes and foxes in general. And so, as with the rest of our enclosures, all of our design will include this double door system. We have this area where, instead of just going straight into where the animals are, we have this safety area. I did bring along the foxes' food today, so this looks like a tasty breakfast. Foxes are omnivores, and so we have a variety of different produce, and we have quite a few mice. And so that would be typical fox diets. In the land of vineyards, yes, foxes do end up eating a fair number of grapes. This is a gray fox, and so what we'll do is we're going to head to the middle of the enclosure. Now, because these individuals are so geriatric, this is one of the few enclosures where at this moment in time with these individuals, it is safe and appropriate to head in with them. With most of our educational ambassador animals, we're always on the outside. But these two, age has made them quite gentle. And so we'll go head on into the middle of our enclosure, and we'll just find a nice spot, settle down, and take a look and talk about these foxes from here. And so the gray fox that you just saw, now they're called gray foxes, but they certainly can have a fair bit of orange to them. And so she's just on the ramp right over there. And so you can see a range of color patterns in terms of almost entirely gray to just this kind of rust color on the chest and on the ears. That would be common, or even kind of like 2/3 kind of a lighter color, browner to orangey, but it is still all gray fox. In a moment, we'll look at the red fox, which looks strikingly different once you know what to look for. And so, see if you can take a couple steps closer. And so, gray foxes are one of only a couple canids, a couple dog-like species, that can actually climb. And so, as you saw her walk, you could see that she was relatively low to the ground. And so, let's see, where do we want to go that's going to be least disruptive to them? Well, let's go right here in the middle. Okay. And we'll just kind of hunker down and see what our foxes want to do. And so we're just going to be patient, be on fox time as we take a look. And see if you can take a glance at our red fox over there. He's up on the ramp. So is he in the shot?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so red foxes, you can see, look strikingly different. Now, first of all, we do have, this individual is non-releasable. He does have some medical issues. So his eyes and that squinty appearance, that is not typical of red foxes. That is specific to his condition, which we'll talk about in a moment. And so the red fox color pattern, you can see it's reddish along the entire top of the body with black legs, tail tip, and ears. Now again, this is a geriatric individual, so he's a bit more gray than red on some areas. But you can also see how tall and long-legged he is. And so red foxes are much more typical of the majority of the canid family, where they're going to be walking along those tall grass areas, and they're going to have a much higher stature to their gait. And so red foxes are actually not native to Sonoma County. And so there are a number of different fox species around the state. You got your Sierra Nevada red fox, you got Channel Island foxes, But here in Sonoma County, the only fox we have that you'll see that's native is the gray fox. And so red foxes are seen around the county. In terms of where did they originate, they're a population that's been gradually making their way here. When I first started here at Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue, there was some interest from the UC Davis genetics lab, and a couple of the red foxes that came through our facility, they did some testing on and found that the origin of those foxes appeared to be the following. Way back almost a century ago, foxes were commonly reared for their fur, for fur coats. And so then when the Great Depression came in, the bottom of that market fell out, and then a lot of people in Southern California that had fox farms just let all the foxes go, and that population gradually made its way north. And so that's thought to be the rough origin of the red foxes we have around here. And red foxes are kind of problematic for rehabilitation centers in terms of how far we want to care for them, because they are not native, and they can be quite damaging to some other native endangered populations in the Bay Area, such as the red-legged frogs, San Francisco garter snakes, things like that. And so it is a conundrum, but we do treat red foxes here at this facility. Now, red foxes, they can go up on those ramps, but gray foxes, they can really climb. They can climb spontaneous fences. They can climb straight up trees. In fact, there's a reason why we have this particular structure in our fox enclosure. And so owl boxes are a great way to manage the rodents in your area. However, you have to be very precise with your box design, or you're going to end up getting things other than owls that are utilizing that facility. And so this was one that someone had built and had on their own property, and what happened was there was no ramp. It was just this stalk, but a gray fox climbed right up in and can hang out, can eat those babies, can eat those eggs, and so we use a very different design for our owl boxes. And so gray foxes, great climbers. And so that's why you'll see them. They'll go over fences, they'll go over trees, and they're very common in our environments. In fact, there's even a number of urban gray foxes. There's populations that live underneath some of the buildings at Santa Rosa Junior College and other areas in the middle of Santa Rosa. We do come in and care for these foxes every day, they're not used to all this vocalization. And so we'll just hunker down and try to get low and less threatening and just see what we can see. And are there any questions so far?
Not yet.
All right.
I'm sure there will be now.
And so, if you guys have questions, just chime on in. And so now that red fox that's running around, first of all, red foxes are in general more active. They are in general just kind of more, have more urgency to a lot of their activities. In rehabilitation centers, they can be higher strung, but this individual red fox, he actually suffers from pretty profound neurologic damage. And while we can't definitively prove what caused that damage, there's one top suspect. In terms of diseases, there's one disease that is throughout a lot of the wildlife in California in general as a concern, and specifically this year, and that is an infectious viral disease called distemper. And so distemper is a virus that will affect the neurologic system, it can affect the respiratory system, and it can affect the skin. You might have heard of distemper if you have pet dogs, because one of the routine vaccines you'll give is called DHPP, and that D stands for distemper. And so there are different strains of distemper virus, and it's not clear if the one that affects foxes can also affect domestic dogs, but we do know that distemper is a common problem in our raccoon populations, in our fox populations, and some years it can be just downright devastating. Now, foxes might seem a lot like domestic dogs, but they are a distinct species, and if you were to give a fox the domestic canine distemper vaccine, you actually, instead of protecting that fox, you may actually give the fox that disease. And so we do protect these guys from distemper, but we can't use the dog vaccine. We actually have to use a special version of the vaccine that's made for ferrets. And so the ferret version of the vaccine has a different technology behind it, and it does not have the risk of causing the disease, but it still provides that excellent protection. And so if an animal survives distemper, then they can have permanent neurologic damage, such as what we see with this red fox. And so every once in a while you may see a little bit of head shaking to his motion, you may see a little bit of irregularity to some of the ways that he's moving his body around. And so that is not uncommon in the cases of distemper that happen to survive. And so in terms of other issues that we see with foxes, often we will just have orphan foxes if there's something that happened to the parents. And then occasionally they can get a lot of parasites and other infectious concerns as well. And so right now, so our red fox is doing his rounds, investigating his area. And both of these foxes here, like I said, they are quite geriatric. Obviously he's not releasable because of his neurologic status, but they've been with us for many years now. I think they're both hitting over 10 years old. And so we'll see if in his rounds he decides to become comfortable enough to come closer. We'll give him a couple more rounds before we'll leave him be. And so foxes are one of the more common species in Sonoma County, in terms of that people will be aware of. And foxes, they are, in our environment, they're primarily crepuscular, primarily out at dawn and dusk. And so, like I said, we do have urban foxes, and if you see poop on your own lawn or whatnot, it always could be a fox instead of a domestic pet someone had.
Do have a few questions here.
Oh, sure. Let's see what questions we have.
How related are the red foxes in North America to the red foxes in Europe?
Gotcha. So they're not, and so in terms of the phylogenetic tree, I'm not sure exactly where the branching is. They are distinct species, and also it depends on what you mean. And so some of the fox populations here, if they're originating from that fur trade, they actually may be European foxes that have been feral in our area, as opposed to the North American red fox. And so, as is likely the case with this individual.
Do red foxes and gray foxes get along or even mate?
So no, they don't. They don't really get along. They are quite. And so the two that we have in here both happen to have neurologic deficits, and so they're both tolerant of the proximity of each other. But in the wild, they wouldn't interact very much. In fact, they may be competitors for a lot of food resources. They'd both be omnivores in terms of what they'd seek after to consume. So getting comfortable to come a little bit closer.
All right, and then how many are kept in each enclosure, and how many individual enclosures do you have there?
Gotcha. So here, we have two different areas here on the Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue premise. We have our rehab enclosures, and we have our education loop. Here at Education Loop, we only keep just the token number of animals, the minimum required to be able to have the educational function. So we have one gray fox and one red fox. And so in a lot of our enclosures, we'll just have a couple individuals. And so we have our fox enclosure, we have our coyote enclosure, we have our mountain lion enclosure, we have our raccoon enclosure, we have our skunk enclosure, we have our opossum enclosure, we have our bobcat enclosure, we have our squirrel enclosure, and we have a raptor enclosure. And so that's the list here. On the rehab side, populations ebb and flow, and so we'll keep cohorts of animals the same age together, and those can be in larger groups, anywhere from a few to, if we happen to have the right kind individuals put together, up to 9 or 10 individuals together. And we have a few dozen different rehab enclosures. And those populations, of course, they come in and out, where the animals come through as they develop, and then they get returned to the wild. And taking you guys through the different kinds of enclosures as an orphan ages towards release, that'll probably be the main focus of next week's live cast.
Right. Does Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue vaccinate all wildlife they treat before release back into the wild?
So that's a great question, a very touchy subject, because the state Fish and Wildlife does not want us to vaccinate in general for certain things. They want to, just in terms of the dynamics of the ebbs and flows of monitoring and controlling the disease in the population, they don't necessarily want a lot of vaccinated individuals out there. And so we do tend to vaccinate the foxes for distemper, just because it can be such a profound issue with them. Opossums, for example, don't have a natural vaccine that they would need. And so it does depend species by species. All of our permanent residents, we do take care and vaccinate all of them for all relevant diseases. But in terms of the rehab animals, it's a species by species difference. And so we're just going to slowly make our way out here. So we're going to head towards the hospital and take a peek at the little orphan fox, the gray fox that came in, that's currently rehabilitating with us. Any other questions as we go? Or?
Yeah. So, okay. Do male foxes assist in raising young?
that is an excellent question. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. So as a veterinarian, I can tell you a lot about the medical status of these guys. As someone who's had the lucky opportunity to work here, I've learned a fair bit about the natural history of a lot of these species, but that is a detail I'm afraid I am not aware of. We'll have to get back to you guys on that one.
Is there any program that captures and relocates red foxes so that they don't harm native habitats and species?
So gotcha. So the whole idea of capturing and relocating is actually something that is going to be explicitly against the law for rehabilitators in the state of California. You can only take in animals and then release immediately on the vicinity where they were found. That is the way the rehab world operates here in California. And so I'm just going to get down low. I'm going to look away. I'm going to try to be as non-threatening as possible. See if Todd will decide to trust my presence enough for that mouse. And so while of course he's very interested, I'm a new individual, not routinely in here, not one of his routine caretakers. So it was pretty good trust for just a few minutes of hanging out, especially with all the noise I'm making. And so we'll go ahead and leave him in peace and let him enjoy his day. These guys routinely, you'll find them just basking, sunning. And actually, let's go ahead and focus on our gray fox for a moment. And you can see how much lower that stance is on those legs. You can see how different that gray fox almost crouches as it walks. It's just a different setup. I mean, those legs are made for climbing, whereas and navigating, a hilly, rocky area, whereas the red fox is really more of a grassland, more of a plain setup. And so I finally trusted enough to grab that mouse. All right, so if you just want to focus on our gray fox for a while, because this is the one that we should really be focusing on. This is our truly native neighbor, and so this is a really fun species that we have around here in terms of that gray fox. They are relatively adaptable, which is why we can find them in semi-urban areas within the county. In terms of what they'll eat, if you leave food out for your dogs and cats, they may come to those bowls at night. But they do eat a lot of rodents, which of course we appreciate. And they will go for different produce as well, just kind of opportunistically. They'll eat small amphibians and things as well. And so, but there's our star, there's our gray fox. And so again, this is a geriatric individual. It's been with us for many, many years. Just never was quite bright. We talked last week about how we test all animals to make sure they can perform the skills needed to survive in the wild. And this individual, many years ago, just could not do that. It was also rejected by cohorts of similarly aged gray foxes that we tried to rehabilitate it with. It may be that they can sense something that we can't quite articulate in terms of something that was off with this little gray fox here. And so we've just provided the forever home here since we happen to have an opening in our education loop. All right, and so we'll head through our double door system. As we head out, the regular feeders will spread this food throughout the enclosure so that these guys will get their full meal for the day. But I always want to make sure things are securely locked. Foxes, especially those foxes, can be quite profound diggers. They can make extensive tunnel systems. And so if you so certainly a little gap, this big is going to let all the foxes in the world in, should they desire. So we got to make sure everything is secure here as we enter and leave our fox enclosure. And so, any other questions as we're...
Somebody was asking about the semi-retractable claws of the gray fox, and asking if that is the only fox that has
those?
Yeah.
So the idea of retractable claws is kind of a bit of a... most species can manipulate their toes, manipulate their digits to whether that claw be fully out or not. Kind of the classic would be the felid, where it can rotate that 45 degrees out or so. And so all species of canids, can, even your pet dog, they can, that claw can be somewhat back. It's just not going to pull back quite as far. So it's more of a continuum than an on or off system. And so all our different canids, including gray foxes, have that to an extent. Gray foxes do have more dexterity and manipulation on that wrist and on that toe, which is going to be part of how they can climb.
Perfect.
All right, so right now we're in front of the education loop. We're going to head over to the main building where we have our main hospital area, and so there may be a little bit of wind. I'll try to talk through it. And so on the way, we looked at that one owl box in that enclosure, which is not a functional owl box. If your priority is helping owls, we'll take just a quick pan here so you can see the model of the boxes that we use on the hundreds of owl boxes that we install and maintain throughout the county. And
so our boxes are the green boxes.
Yeah, our boxes are the green boxes. There's a couple other ones that when we talk about owl boxes with folks, we have a couple others there just to talk about different kinds of features. And so actually Wednesday is an exciting day for me for this season, where I'm going out and monitoring some of our owl boxes. And so last week we started to have chicks that we are seeing occupancy rates pretty typical, anywhere from 50 to 70% in a well-designed location for an owl box. And we are already seeing chicks in a lot of those owl boxes. Many of those chicks are already several weeks old. And so we are in the middle of our baby season across all species. And so I'll do my best to not trip as we walk backwards. And so we're just going to head into the main building there, and we'll so they can end up focusing on the orphan gray fox that we happen to have on site right now. And so for those of you who weren't with us in the beginning, our numbers do continue to climb as typical for the season. We do have 109 animals in care, 100 of those actually on site. And so the bulk of them, we're that wave of opossums, and opossums continue to come in. At the moment, about 70 of those individuals are opossums. The percentage will continue to diminish as we get through summer and get more individuals coming in, but we have no less than 5 opossums found in folks' yards coming in already this morning. Any other questions, or shall I just keep going?
Not so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
And some of the other orphans we happen to have on site include not just the opossums and squirrels as we had in the first wave, but we already have a long-tailed weasel, we already have raccoons, we already have skunks, and we already have some gray foxes as part of the cohort. We tend to get a few dozen foxes in over the course of the year, as opposed to a few hundred opossums. And so just in terms of the typical species breakdown, that we'll see. All right, so we'll head in through the food area so we get out of the wind.
Probably getting really windy.
Hopefully you guys can still hear me as we head towards that nursery and say hello to the orphans. As juveniles, gray foxes mature relatively quickly compared to some other species. And so gray foxes will wean and be eating solid food in the wild as of just a few weeks. Every species is different, and that's relatively quick compared to a lot of species. And so the little guy that we're going to visit is around 4-ish weeks of age, and so is already enjoying some solid food on his own. All right, hopefully everything's much clearer now.
A little dark in here, but okay.
All right, so we're going through the tunnel of the hallway on our way to the hospital. And so because we went from those adult individuals towards the juveniles, I'm going to go ahead and swap out gloves, and we'll end up taking a peek at that orphan fox. So last time I saw him, he was charismatic through the incubator glass, and so we'll see if that's still the case. And so we'll just swing on in. So here's our kind of nursery area for all the different orphans that we have. Again, thank you guys so much for the funding to upgrade our incubators. Right here is where our little gray fox is hanging out. So this little fox kit, this little fox cub, like I said, is coming in at about 4 or so weeks of age. He's already independently starting to eat some solid food. He did come in quite debilitated in terms of an orphan state, and so he does still need some assistance. He does still need some supplementation in terms of things like fluid therapy and sub-Q fluids. And so now with foxes, if someone finds a fox, sometimes they'll be worried. Oh, it's going to be a couple days around humans. That will be a problem for its release to the wild. Foxes, we found, are extremely dynamic and extremely well adjusted to keeping and developing the wild behavior that they need. And so foxes, even ones that people had inappropriately for a significant period of time, often they can wild up quite readily and quite effectively to be returned to the wild where they belong. And so this is gray fox. This is our native species. And so you guys saw that geriatric individual out in our enclosure, and this is what the few-week-old orphans would appear as. And so she has been doing pretty well now. With all animals that come into wildlife rehabilitation, the most critical period of time for the outcome is the first 24 hours. For a wild animal to come into a rehab center, there's a lot of things that have to happen. They have to be compromised in a number of different ways, and so by the time they come in, they often can be in a quite critical condition. But if they make it through that first 24 hours, then their odds are quite good for surviving all the way to being released into the wild. And so I hope you guys have enjoyed our visit, our exploration of all things native with our foxes. And so thank you guys so much for spending some time with us during this live stream. We are going to stick with the same Wednesday 10 a.m. schedule in terms of what's fitting with our new shift towards the summer baby season. And so thank you guys again for chiming in with us, and we'll see you next week.